Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today we're going to be taking a look at Monster Train, a relatively new game that came out a couple of days ago. I think it's just about 10 days ago at this point, something like that. And it is a new roguelike deck building game. Now, when you hear these two words, you're probably thinking Slay the Spire, but this game is very different. At first, I kind of disregarded the game because I thought, oh well, just another Slay the Spire clone. But then yesterday, I kind of gave into my curiosity, and I have to say that this game is actually really cool and nothing alike Slay the Spire. So, premise of the game is really simple. You are one of the surviving demon factions, hell is frozen over, and you are in possession of the Ember, and you have to try and ride this Ember all the way down to hell to reignite the flames of hell. And doing so, whilst you are going down the tracks all the way down to hell, you have the heavenly monsters trying to basically stop you from doing so. The gameplay itself is really unique. The way that you have all of your different cards work together is very different from something that you would expect from some, for example, like a Slay the Spire game, because this is really different. So let's basically take it from the beginning, how everything works together, and then kind of go from there. So when you start the run, you get to choose three things: your primary faction, your secondary faction, and then your covenant level. Now, when it comes down to your factions, when you choose them, the only real difference in between primary and secondary is that your primary faction will also grant you your champion. Your champion is different for each faction, and you basically want to kind of choose which faction champion that you want by choosing them as your primary faction. Your secondary faction will just be there to support you with all of their cards as well. It's mainly just the choice of the champion that you're going to be taking right there. Your champion is also something that you can upgrade towards the runs as well, which we'll talk about in just a second how all of that works as well. When it comes down to your covenant level, this is basically the difficulty of the game. I beat the game on my second try, which I was like, wow, this is really easy. Because, for example, a game like Slay the Spire, I've spent over 40 hours in the game and I still haven't beaten a run. But this one, I beat on my second try and I was like, wait, this feels a bit too simple. But once you beat the run, you unlock covenant levels. And every time that you increase the level of your covenant, your runs are going to be harder and harder. You also get some bonuses. For example, on Covenant level 1, when you start a run, you get 3 random cards given to you in your deck as well, which is really nice. And this will change depending on the level of Covenant that you are running the game on. Now, to increase the level of your Covenants, you need to beat it on the previous level as well. So, for example, to unlock level 1, I had to beat the normal run. To unlock level 2, I needed to beat the game on level 1. So basically, every time that you beat it on your highest covenant level, you're going to be unlocking the next one all the way up to level 25, and which is quite a high level and will make the game really difficult because, of course, all of the enemies will become a lot harder as well. And you kind of get to choose the difficulty of your enemies as well sometimes through trials, which whenever you get an encounter, sometimes there will be a trial and you get to choose whether or not you want to activate this one. When you activate it, you get bonus loot at the end of the run, but the run will also, or the encounter will also be a lot harder because, for example, enemies spawn in with 10 shields, they spawn in with bonus attack or something like that, basically making the run a little bit harder. And then it's kind of like a risk reward. Do you want to make it harder for yourself and get more loot at the end, or do you want to just play it safe and have the encounter be as like it normally would be? Now, when it comes down to the gameplay itself, you have a very simple gameplay loop. You have an encounter where you have to fight a bunch of waves of enemies until you fight the boss wave, which is the final wave, and then you move on to the deck building part of the game, where you get to choose one out of 2 tracks, the left track and the right track, and then depending on which one you choose, you get different upgrades available to you. These can be things that let you upgrade your monsters, upgrade your spells, remove cards out of your deck, add new cards to your deck, upgrade monsters, or like, for example, duplicate your cards, upgrade your champion. There's basically a bunch of different things that you can do there. So basically check, what do you want? Do I want to heal my pyre? Do I want to remove cards out of my deck? Do I want to upgrade some monsters, or do I want to upgrade my spells? So basically check which track gives you what upgrades and then choose accordingly, because, for example, if you've already upgraded all your monsters to the maximum, then getting the track that gives you monster upgrades is probably not really going to be the best choice right there. The reason why I say maximum upgrade is because each card can only be upgraded twice. Now, there are ways to get around this limitation or this restriction, but in general you can only upgrade cards twice. This goes for monsters as well as for spells. So make sure that you kind of look at what upgrades you have available to you, which cards you might want to give different upgrades as well. Like, for example, if it is a very glass cannon kind of unit, maybe you should make it do even more damage. Or if it's a very tanky unit, maybe give it some retaliation or something like that whenever it gets stricken or struck I guess is the right word, whenever it gets struck, that it would like retaliate and deal some damage back or something like that. Kind of work around those kind of things and make sure that you basically don't get too many upgrades just to upgrade a card for the sake of it, so that you can see that you don't basically get limited by what you can do because you just gave some random upgrades to a card. So really cool stuff that you can do with that. Now, when it comes down to the actual encounters, that's where the majority of the gameplay will take place, of course, because the upgrading and the deck building is actually really nice in this game and feels a lot more involved than something like Slay the Spire. But when it comes down to the encounters, they are very unique as well. So when it comes down to the encounters themselves, you have your train, which is where everything takes place. You have 4 different levels. You have your Ember at the top. This is your HP. If this reaches 0, you die, it's game over. And underneath that, you have 3 different floors as well. Now, the thing is, you need to play your monsters on these 3 different floors to basically prevent the enemy from reaching the Ember. If they reach the Ember, it's not the end of the world because your Ember can retaliate and has some attack attached to it as well. So if they reach there, sometimes, like for example, if there's a zero attack monster or something like that, it's just a tank, you can let it reach the top floor and then your Ember will just take it out because it deals 0 damage to it. Totally viable strategy, but of course, most monsters will have some attack cost attached to them. Now, when it comes down to playing cards and that kind of stuff, because you have those 2 different types of cards. You have your monsters and you have your spells. Now, monster cards also have a space cost attached to them, and each different floor has a specific amount of spaces available to play monster cards. So say for example you have a floor with 6 spaces, you could play 2 3-cost cards on there that take up 3 spaces, but you could instead also play 6 1-cost cards on there, depending on what you want to do. There is a way to get around these restrictions. There is a way to increase the limit of each floor as well. And there's a couple of cool things that you can do with these, basically like the space restrictions. I'm not going to go into too much detail about all of them, but basically each floor has a space cost or like a space limitation. Each monster that you want to play has a specific space cost on top of the mana, because you of course also need to have the mana in order to play the card. But this will basically restrict where you can place that monster in your train. When it comes down to the enemies, in general, enemies will spawn at the bottom side of your train on level 1. And then when the round ends, they'll move up 1 level. This will always be the case. There are ways for enemies to spawn on higher floors as well, but most of the time, these enemies won't actually go up floors and that kind of stuff, but they will usually be attached to boss mechanics or something like that. In general, monsters spawn at the bottom. At the end of the round, they move up 1 floor. Your monsters stay on their specific floors and they won't move up unless you have certain cards that make them move up or down floors. And these cards are also the way how you can basically bypass the restrictions of specific space on the floors as well. Now, when it comes down to each round, what kind of happens is basically the gameplay will go, or the combat will go from top to bottom. So you start on your highest floor possible, and then you move down each floor, and all of the enemies strike you once, all of your monsters strike the enemies once as well. Once that's done, your enemies move up a floor and you go into the next round. Now, when you are on the final round, the boss has spawned. Yes, either like sometimes the boss will spawn on the final round, sometimes the boss is just flying next to your train. You'll see that in the gameplay as well. But then basically when the boss has gotten to the final round, he'll start at the bottom and then make his way up to your Ember, and you'll fight to the death. So when he's on your bottom floor, you get to play cards, and then the boss as well as your monsters fight to the death. If the boss dies, good, you're done with the encounter. If your boss does, or if the boss survives, then all of your monsters will die, your bottom floor will freeze over, and the boss will move to floor number 2, where you get to play cards again. You get new mana, it's a new turn. You play cards, the boss and your monsters fight to the death again, freezes that floor, and then moves on to floor number 3, where you get your last turn, play some cards, and then your boss and your monsters fight to the death. If the boss isn't dead at that point, he'll start whacking at your Ember, which of course your Ember has attack points as well, so you'll retaliate to kind of try to slay the monster as well, which if your Pyre defeats the boss, fine, you just move on to the next round, or like to the next encounter. If of course the boss kills your Ember, then it is game over right there. So it's really cool gameplay loop right there. Also, one thing I forgot to mention is that whenever you play a monster and it dies, it doesn't come back to life. Whenever you play monster cards, the monsters are gone. so to speak. Like, they're on the field, the cards are gone. There are ways for you to get cards back when they die by using a perk called Endless, but for the most part, whenever you play cards, those monsters will be gone and will only come back to your hand again in the next encounter, not on the next round. So there's definitely something to keep in mind. When it comes down to spells, spells will rotate kind of like you're used to in something like Slay the Spire. Play out your whole deck, and then your discard pile goes back to become your draw pile, and then you can play your cards right there again. So it's a really cool concept. Really think this game has got quite a lot of potential, and I definitely recommend people that enjoy roguelike deck building games to basically go try this one out as well. There's 5 different factions, each with all of their own specific monsters and spell cards, different champions to play around with as well. So there's a lot of variety and replayability in this game for sure. And add on top of that, there's 25, technically 26 different difficulty levels for the game as well, that each have their own different perks and drawbacks. I think it just makes this game pretty amazing. And I'm definitely going to keep playing it for quite some time, because Slay the Spire is something that I got in for quite a while. I played the game quite a lot, never managed to beat it. But this one, I managed to beat it already, but I'm definitely not done with this one just yet, because it is a ton of fun. So that is Monster Train. I hope I was maybe able to interest some of you guys to go try it out as well. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to go check it out on Steam. But that's gonna be it for me. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.